Okay. Welcome everyone to Cache Valley Unitarian Universalists, also known as CVUU. Here at CVUU, we strive to keep open minds in our search for truth and meaning in the spirit of justice, equity, and compassion. We recognize the dignity and inherent worth of each individual. We are a small, lay-led congregation, relying on members and friends as opposed to a professional ministry to provide our worship content and programs. Because of this, our services reflect the diversity of voices that make up this community. It matters not what you believe. Everyone with a loving heart is welcome here. My name is Sandra, and this morning I'm serving as the worship associate for today's service. I'd like to start out our service with a moment of silence and recognition and connection with the people that are here around us in the virtual world. I've got a little meditation to start us out with for this moment of silence. We come together this morning to remind one another to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist the headlong tumble into the next moment until we claim for ourselves awareness and gratitude, taking the time to look into one another's faces and see their communion, the reflection of our own eyes. This house of laughter and silence, memory and hope, is hallowed by our presence together. I'm not sure how the ringing of the bell comes across through the computer. Hopefully it doesn't hurt people's ears. All right. The flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. The flame of chalices that are lit around the world represents a faith in action. If you would like to join me in the chalice lighting words that are up in the chat here, please feel free. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of wisdom, and the energy of action. All right, and I've got some quick opening words. They're in the chat as well, if you would like to follow along. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. All right, and now we have our first song, which is different from what I had put in the order of service because we're using one that we have recorded before, Spirit of Life, and so Jordan should have that recording to play for us.
One, two, one, two. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. like a ship of justice, roots only clouds, wings set me free, Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
All right. We each come to worship with our own experiences shaping how we feel. In the supportive community, let us reflect together on the uniqueness of each individual with the unison meditation on joys and sorrows. So let's see, it's up in the chat if you would like to join in to the meditation here. We gather in this community, sometimes in fear, sometimes in trust, sometimes in joy, but always in hope that we can support and strengthen one another in our common quest for healing and wholeness. So if you feel comfortable with it, I invite you to share the joys and sorrows that are on your mind for the week. If you would like to share, please put your name up in the chat and we can call on you. As is our tradition, I am going to light 2 final candles. One for all of those who kept their joys and sorrows in their hearts, and one for all of those in the world who are still in harm's way. All right, so before we have our presentation, we have a responsive reading here. All right, so the way that responsive readings work normally is that I read the regular text and then the congregation joins in on the text that is in caps lock. So I'll be reading the whole thing, and if you would like to, you may join in with me. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid. We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone. We need one another in the hour of success, when we look for someone to share our triumphs. We need one another in the hour of defeat, when, with encouragement, we might endure and stand again. We need one another when we come to die and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey. All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us. All right, so now I would like to turn the time over to Bill for his presentation on emergency preparedness. And also a big thank you to Bill for joining us today, and a big thank you to Julianne, who helped set this whole thing up for us.
Thank you so much. Before we begin my presentation, I want to thank Julianne and you, Sandra, for the invite and the ability I have to participate with you this morning. I'm frankly moved by the wonderful message that you provide of caring and love and diversity, and the need for all of us to be able to strengthen one another. I'm touched by that, and thank you so much for inviting me here. I will share my presentation with you. I will begin by telling you a little bit about myself while I'm getting it up online. I have been involved in emergency management and response and recovery now for over a decade. I've been an emergency manager for an agency in Colorado. I currently am the vice chair of VOAD for Northern Utah. VOAD stands for Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. And that includes service organizations like Red Cross and others, as well as faith-based groups, Methodist, Adventist, Lutherans, all people of all different faiths. And then I'm also a community volunteer leader with the American Red Cross. So I've got a lot of scar tissue on the back of this gray head that came from being involved in 20 or 30 different disaster responses. I've seen what happens when people are prepared, and I see what happens when they bear the burden of not having been prepared. So today I'm going to talk about how we build bridges between the faith-based and emergency management communities, two sides of the table, the private sector and the government sector. I'm going to talk about what FEMA calls the whole community response, which, by the way, your tenets and your statements earlier about depending on one another is so exactly spot on, as we'll talk about when we get to talk about that subject. I'm going to talk about how to be prepared as individuals, as groups, and as a community, and then talk about the bridges that go across two different levels, at the local level and the wide area level. I have what I call basic emergency rules of three to give you a sense of the structure and the language. There are three emergency timeframes. Everything that we do before the bad thing happens is called preparedness. Everything we do immediately when something bad happens is response. And what happens over the long term as we try to get back to a new normal is, in the government terms, recovery. As I mentioned, we get prepared as individuals, and then as groups, family units, church units, community groups, and then as a whole community. You'll hear me talk about three government responder levels: local, state, and federal. The local and state responders are the offices of emergency management. The emergency managers like Will Lusk at the county, Sandy Spendlove for North Logan is one that comes to mind. They have emergency managers at Utah State University and at the other municipalities in the area, but it's at three levels: local, state, and federal. The whole community approach that FEMA came up with, if you look at the date on this document, this doctrine that they published was December, almost a decade ago. And the interesting thing is that it took them a long time to realize that you can't parachute in from somewhere else when something bad happens and make everything well. Disasters are local, and let me clear the chat out of the way here. And we all need to come together as communities, and this is a statement of the past FEMA administrator on that subject. All the responsibility, authority, and resources move to the local level when something bad happens. And as I mentioned, top-down doesn't work. FEMA lands, they land like 8 or 10 days after the bad thing happened. They don't know what the battlefield really is. They don't know how to effectively deal with many of the issues that we see locally. So emergency response, like disasters, is locally, and we all share a welfare responsibility and need to work together, which goes back to the wonderful tenets that you talked about earlier. Some photographs here to give some reality that have been taken in different events. First responders, the people that show up quickly, police, fire, EMS, et cetera, are less than 1% of our population. And they were designed to handle simple events. The fire department is used to one-off house fires. And when they roll their hoses up, they're ready for the next one-off house fire. EMS is used to a heart attack here or an injury there, but not having a mass casualty situation. As a side note, there are only 11 ambulances with crews in the whole of Cache Valley from the Idaho border south. So that's not a whole lot of resources even for emergency medical. Those emergency resources are limited. The call centers get overloaded. Phone services often die, including your cell phone. Shelves go empty in 72 hours, and I've lived through this, watching them go bare. When you walk in, it's not just the toilet paper that's gone, it's everything else virtually that you can imagine, except light bulbs, I think, was the only time I found anything on the shelves. If you look at Tucson, Arizona, about 6 or 8 years ago, they had a shooting in a Safeway parking lot, a mass shooter that just randomly was shooting people. It consumed 100% of all their trauma resources and overwhelmed the whole city of Tucson, and that was one single event. So I want to give you a scenario. Pick a disaster in your mind. It could be a wildfire or a small flood or a tornado or an earthquake shake, whatever. Ask yourself, where are you when that happens? When I asked this before Corona days, people would say they were at school or they were at work or they were at the grocery store or the mall, and their family members, if they had children, might have been in school or the way there or the way back, but generally not at home. That changes with all us being in quarantine. How are you going to communicate? The cell phone's a wonderful tool, but I've seen it overload almost instantly. FEMA finds that when the main cell phone circuits are overloaded, the text message parts of the tower still work, and you can use that as a way to communicate an emergency rather than voice. When the bad thing happens, do you have everything you need with you? I'm sure many of you have great flashlight boxes at home and food storage and other kinds of things, but when you're caught away from home, you don't have them with you. So in this scenario, what do you do if you can't get home? The police have put up the yellow tape, sealing areas off for whatever reason. You've been disconnected from your family members. Your phone doesn't work. You don't know where you're going to reunite. You don't know how to communicate. And you don't have what you need to make it on the next 72 hours on your own. Are you prepared to shelter in place wherever you happen to be, or do you try to evacuate to some other location? This points out some of the misconceptions we have. We all deep down inside think that when the bad thing happens, we're all going to be home with everyone present that we love, and we're going to have all our important stuff with us. We also believe that if we're not home, we'll be able to get home to get what's needed. We'll be able to pick up a phone and call for help, including 911, and get what we need. We'll be provided whatever we need by others, and that there will only be one disaster. I'm thinking of the earthquake they had off Japan 8 or 9 years ago, where the earthquake was the first disaster, the tsunami that hit Japan. Yokohama was a second disaster, then it washed out a nuclear power plant, which then caused contamination, which was the next disaster. So this concept that there's only going to be one disaster is unfortunately not how it works. If you're a faith-based groups, you'll find that that bad things happen at the worst time. It doesn't happen when everybody's in the meeting house together. It doesn't happen when all the leaders are locally available. And oftentimes, the congregations are waiting for somebody in higher authority to show up and help them understand what to do. If you have a building, I tell faith-based groups with buildings, if you build it, they will come. Because it doesn't matter if they're a member of your congregation. If something bad happens in that neighborhood, they're going to go to the local school or the local church, and you need to understand what you can do to help them when they get there. We talk about emergency communications, and many people think, oh, that's a cell phone, or it's a VoIP, voice over internet on the internet, or it's a ham amateur radio, but it's really a toolbox. And you have to understand all the tools that are in the box and know how to use them all. And then there's, what are your emergency resources? Where do you go to get what you need? How do you find out what's going on? Is there an evacuation in place, et cetera? We'll talk about those things. And then the bottom line is, are you ready as an individual, a group, and a faith-based group? FEMA has these 3 things that it talks about for being ready. And I'm going to go quickly through these slides, but I'm going to hopefully have some time for questions and answers when we're finished here. The goal is make a plan, build a kit, and be informed. So what kind of a plan do you need? You need at least 2 kinds of plan. A quick action guide if you're the leadership in your congregation. What do you do if something bad's about to happen? What are the first 5 things you do? If something bad just happened, what are the next 5 things you do? And what are your resources? Do you have people that have generators for the elderly that have special needs in their home, or they're not able to provide for themselves, et cetera? How do you get organized? The ICS acronym is a federal one for the Incident Command System. It's how the whole of government, every type and color of government, organizes to respond to a disaster. And it's easy to learn those things and to get comfortable with them. We talked about how do you communicate, and how do you get critical information in and out? How do you know if your members are safe or at risk? And then how do you recover? So what kind of kit do you need? You need a basic kit that gives you 3 or 4 days of supplies, both for you, your family, and your pets if you have any. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can put it together. Many of you have those in your camping gear box, your fishing and hunting box, your first aid kits, et cetera. It's just an issue of having them available and keeping them current. You need to have at least 2 kits, the one you have at home that you can grab and go, as they say, grab and go bag for evacuations, and a portable kit that you keep in your car trunk or in your office. And I always take a small kit about the size of a small loaf of bread. That is what I need if something bad happens when I'm on travel. Then you have to update them recently. I didn't mention about myself, but I'm a retired peace officer, among other things. And I remember at a major emergency, my flashlight went dead. It was about 2 in the morning. No problem. I got 2 more in the car. I take them out. Batteries are dead on the first one. No problem. I got a second one. I take it out. The batteries are dead. They don't do you any good if you don't update them and make sure that they're current regularly. Daylight savings time is what many people use to tag that. When it's daylight savings, move your clock forward or backward. That's the time to go through your kit, see what's expired, renew some of the beef jerky and the other things you might have in there for yourselves. You can go to Ready Utah and see lists of the kinds of things that it's good to have in small kits or large kits. This is a biggie, how to stay informed. Years ago, people thought that posting on social networks, my neighborhood's being evacuated, and you post it, will help people, which it does for that moment. Then when the authorities realize that the emergency is over 8 hours later and tell you to go home, those social postings are being reposted, and people still think the evacuation is ongoing. When they say that the danger is chlorine gas blowing in from the northwest, that gets reposted, the wind changes and it blows north, but they're looking at the repostings, they're not looking at the current information. So it's important to know where and how to get critical information. You can get it on emergency broadcast on TV. You can buy an emergency radio that has a channel that will provide that. You can use the internet if it's still up and running and you have backup power or the power is on, and social networks, but you need to know what those connections are on the internet and the connections are on the social network. Authorities may want to evacuate. They have what they call E911, which is reverse 911. That used to work great when everybody's primary communications was a landline at home. But unless you've taken your cell phones and registered them with Cache County or North Logan, when they put that warning out, you won't get it. So it's important to either register your phone with the local authorities or they have something that's called Code Red, all one word, CODERED, and you go to that.com and it allows you to register your information, and there's a national system that broadcasts very area specific alerts, and you'll get them on your phone. I used to get an alert that I had 1-inch hail coming. Run outside, get the cars in the garage, and sure enough, 15 minutes later, you got 1-inch hail. So it's worth having those. You can also have the NOAA little radios, which are good for that. And they're much better now. The old days, you bought a NOAA radio if you have one of those and you turned it on and it told you everything bad that was happening in a 3-state area, and it got old and you turned it off. Now they target your geographical area so you can set 20-mile limit, 40-mile limit, whatever you want. So they're more effective than they used to be. Staying where you are and avoiding danger is the best thing. People that run out to find out what's happened, to start going up and down the street, are exposed to chemical, biological, radiological risks. If you see that your neighbor's house is half fallen down and you try to run into it to check and see if everybody's okay, then law enforcement will call you the next victim, because a lot of people will get injured and become more victims when they try to do that. So you have to know how to be able to help others and how to report the damage, so the professionals with professional gear can come help. You also need to have some good key maps and routes for evacuation. Everybody depends on their cell phone GPS. Well, guess what? I've seen when the cell phone tower burns down in a wildfire, they go to try to use their GPS and it doesn't work. And then you start to think about, how do I get to that? How do I get north out of this area by a secondary route? And you don't have a map and you can't remember because your hair is on fire. So just having some simple maps and routes laid out in advance are really good. I've talked a couple times about the whole community. Julianne went and attended the Cache Valley Community Preparedness meetings that Will Lusk, the emergency manager, holds once a month. And she now is a known and trusted entity with emergency management. And your group, which she represented so nicely and spoke so well on, is considered a trusted group with the emergency managers. If you're in the book on the trusted side of the page, your chance of getting help, getting emergency water, shelter, notices, and response is much better than if you're in the unknown category. So that's important to be known and trusted. If you learn the language and structure of emergency response, that helps. You'll hear about public information officers. That's a government term for the guy that has all the information going in and out, and what their phone numbers are, what their website pages, what their social links are, will help you with that. But you have to learn a little bit about the language and structure. You need to have a good foundation in place. The thing I see the most is people who thought, well, I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to it's complicated. I don't have money to spend on anything. I'll call 911. Guess what? That doesn't work. Well, somebody else is going to come and give me what I need, maybe in 10 days. But the stuff that's in reserve locally with the Red Cross, emergency management, that's normally gone in the first 12 to 24 hours. So you need to be prepared as individuals and as families. You need to have a good emergency plan. And you need to as a faith-based group, have a very basic emergency response team. Who is it that's going to work communications? Who's going to be linked into the information sources? Who's going to put together teams to go out and help your members? You don't just need stuff from the emergency managers, they need stuff from you. You have buildings, you can provide sheltering, you have other resources, you may have ham radio operators, you may have foreign language skills, a lot of those here because of the university. You may know how to organize and lead volunteer forces. That makes you valuable to emergency management, which again tightens that known and trusted bond you have. I talk about it being a two-way bridge. There are incident command systems on the National Incident Management System online that you can go to. You can look up NIMS. It tells you what the courses are. They take about an hour each for a video course. The ICS 100, 200, 600, and 700 is the best 4 hours you can invest in understanding how things work, the language, the structure, where things are, and that'll help you. The Are You Ready program is one you can use with the other members that may not be on the wire today. Colorado and Utah have a Be Ready program that has links to it that gives you all sorts of tools and information flow. And then there's the Community Emergency Response Teams, CERTs. as they're called, pictures down below, which is training you get if you're in North Logan area. And if you're outside that in adjoining communities, you can attend theirs. I think Julianne's gone to those. They give you about 20 hours of night school training on everything from emergency medical, putting out small fires, emergency communications, all those things, how to evacuate a building. You get all of that training, and it provides a cadre that is good either in the community or in your faith-based group, or even in your HOA or your apartment complex that you might have. I was a medic. That's me in the lower right-hand corner. I was a military medic. I never thought I'd use it again when I retired. And here I am as a CERT member running a triage center in an incident in Colorado. So those things you learn can really be put to good use. The other thing is, if you are a CERT member, you get an ID card, and Julianne, ours are supposedly coming if they vetted us totally, from the class here in North Logan. Those get you past the yellow tape. So if for no other reason, being a Red Cross volunteer, being a CERT member, being a radio relay league ham operator, that gives you an ID card that gets you past the tape where you can get back into your own home, your own community. And you have the ability to shape your own role in an emergency. You can be a resource, you can be a savior to some people, or you can be another victim. It's up to you to just make that decision. I'm going to go quickly through here. Here's an example of a major wildfire in just west of Denver that I was a major responder to. It was a prescribed fire, which means they did a control burn that got out of control. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the fire was driven by 80-mile-an-hour winds in the foothills on the outskirts. I took the pictures you see down below from my home in Littleton when I lived there. It started crowning, which means it goes treetop to treetop at about 5 o'clock. They started mandatory evacuations of 900 homes, and 6,500 other homes that were on standby. They identified trigger points. One was on a ridge where Martin Marietta's offices were, that if the fire reached that ridge, they would bring every fire unit in the whole metro area of Denver to evacuate and do structural defense, they call it, to try to keep all the subdivisions from catching fire house after fire. I was in the emergency operating center at 10 o'clock. The call came in that the fire was going up the hill to that trigger point. The fire chiefs all got their radios and got ready to do their thing. And then at virtually the last minute, the wind direction changed and blew south instead of north, blew the fire back down the hill. They didn't have to do the mass evacuations and mass defense. But the people sleeping in those subdivisions at about 10:30 at night had no clue how close they came to being in a major evacuation and losing everything. This fire eventually destroyed 27 homes and had 3 civilian fatalities, only burned 4,000 acres. And you've been watching with the wildfires here in Utah and Idaho and Colorado. We're talking some of them in the 80,000 acre category or 100,000 acres. So you can multiply that. There were 800 emergency responders involved in fighting that fire. Level 1 management team, which means a national team that flew in as well as volunteers from California. I want to show this slide because it really impressed me. This is in the same neighborhood. You see 2 homes totally destroyed, 1 totally untouched. The hand of Providence. It wasn't because one home was situated differently. It's the fire, when the wind blows, goes where the adversary wants it to go. Some people are spared, some people lose everything. I've helped families sift through the ashes to see if they could find any of grandma's jewelry or any photos that were still intact because they'd lost everything. It's a terrible process. I show this picture because when you get the call to leave immediately, you need to leave. I saw a report from Monument, Colorado, when they had a rail car accident that let chlorine gas loose. The authorities called everybody that was southeast, told them to evacuate immediately because deadly chlorine gas was coming. The news interviewed a couple. They said, "Did you get the call?" "Yes, I got it at 5:30 in the morning. I handed the phone to my wife." "Well, good. How long did it take you to get out of the house?" "Oh, about 2.5 hours. I about fell out of my chair." 2.5 hours for an emergency with the killer gases coming? And the reporter said, "Why did it take you so long?" "Well, we have 2 dogs and a cat, and we had to figure out what they needed, and we had to figure out what we needed. It took that long to load it in the car." The lady you see in this picture, I helped her unload her pickup truck when she got to the recovery center. You see her carrying bags. When I helped her take the bags out, she would look through them and say, "Good grief, these are just cushions from my living room sofa." She'd open up another one. "These are the magazines that I had sitting on the side table." She'd open up another one. "These are dirty dishes. I didn't even grab the clean ones." And it was amazing because when that pressure is on you and your hair's on fire, you don't think rationally. It's so difficult to be able to do what's right. So faith-based groups can participate in the community in a variety of ways. We've talked about some of these. You can build that bridge. You can get the training. Psychological first aid is really good for helping others that have just lost everything. So what do? Ask for bridge building meetings with the key entities you want to be close to. Establish your key connection points. Participate in local exercises. They have those. I'm not sure how active the Citizens Corps is in Cache Valley, but they are great for information. And then look at the website you have on Ready Utah. And here's another one. Join volunteer organizations active in disasters. I think it's a very small annual fee for an organization to join, like $50 or something. And that puts you in the information flow. It makes you a local resource. It makes you help get your neighbors and your loved ones the resources they need on day 2 instead of day 10. So it's worth doing that. Here's an example of many of the members that are all faiths, all service organizations that belong to this. I think there's about 180 different organizations nationally, and we have about 60 of them in the state of Utah. So my email is down at the bottom, and I apologize for running about 5 or 10 minutes long, but if there's any questions, I'd love to be able to field them.
So
No
Bill,
question.
Bill, what's the first thing you do to start building your kit? What would you say? How do you do that?
I'd get a plastic bucket like you use for storing your sweaters for the summertime, and just go around to what I mentioned: hunting and fishing gear, camping gear, storage shelves you might have in the garage, and gather things together so that you have them in 1 or 2 duffel bags or buckets, and see what it is that you have. Then look at the list of things that you should have and start filling in the list. You don't have to run out and spend a lot of money. It's actually more inexpensive than you would think. My grandkids, I was with them in Walmart one time, and they saw the sale section and said, "Oh, wow, look, this is good for my emergency bag." And there was little flashlights that were on sale for $1. And you just find things that are on sale and add them to your kit to get stronger. On the food area, FEMA used to say you need 72 hours worth of being able to take care of yourself food and water wise. There's guides that I can provide your group on how much water do you need, 1 gallon per person per day, for drinking kind of things. How do you store those, whether it's a blue water barrel or plastic bottles or other kinds of containers. For food, you ought to have, ramen noodles is good, but it'll only go so far. You need to have things that have high protein value content. I mentioned beef jerky and beef sticks and things. Those are good if you rotate them. Some just add water. Meals are excellent. And again, you don't have to do the REI camping $8 meal approach. You can look through some of the grocery shelves you have and find teriyaki noodles with beef and everything. You put the water in there, it reconstitutes, and you have the ability to put it in a pan and heat it. So 72 hours is the minimum you ought to be able to have. I love the dairy outlet store that we have down on 1000 West, because they sell milk in cases that'll last for a year and a half without refrigeration, which I hadn't seen before anywhere. I knew that you could pasteurize it and treat it where it would store in the garage, but I hadn't been anywhere where you could really get any of it. And so I have a few cases of that in my chill room downstairs. I just had a hot chocolate this morning that is about a year old and was great hot chocolate. So you can find things like that. Another question?
Yeah, I had a question about communicating, and our friends have mostly stopped having landlines, and I study earthquakes, and so we've kept our landline. Do you know whether that is still, or how likely is the landline to still be working in an emergency? Or should we get a solar charger for a cell phone perhaps?
Yeah, great question. Let me add one thing that I didn't at the end of the other discussion. Get backup medicines. Have first aid kits, and if you're a diabetic, have some extra medicine. Most doctors will enhance your prescription so that you have an extra 30 or 60 days so that you can roll. If you got thyroid problems, you have a 30-day supply that you can put in your grab and go kit. For communication, landlines are great, but most people don't have them anymore. They do have a tendency to work better. But I haven't had a landline in a long time. Cell phones are great, but they have limits as well. Texting, I told you, is a fallback for cell phones. These family radio systems, FRS systems, walkie-talkies for camping are really good, but short distances generally. They say good for 3 miles. Well, they're good for about 3 blocks because of obstructions. They don't work that well indoors. From your deck, they might do better. I used one that reached the other side of the valley from my deck, which is up with a little bit of elevation looking west. Those are good. A lot of people bite the bullet and get an amateur radio, which used to cost, when I got my license, $300 or $400. Now you can buy them for $30. They've got great range, but you have to take an 8-hour class, and then you have to pass a test, and it's not easy. I passed mine. My son, to his shock, failed his because he didn't take it seriously and didn't study. But that's a great backup emergency tool. Internet, if it's up, you can do voice, Skype, and other kinds of things on internet. But if the cell phone tower burns down, there's a chance the internet's not working either, and then you cascade down. Some little devices for power backup, the cell phone chargers that are about this big, inexpensive, those are great. They'll last you a day. They'll do 3 or 4 recharges for a day or 2. You can get these small backup emergency power boxes about that big at Sam's Club for about $65 to $80 that are intended for computers to back your computer up for a few hours. But just keeping one of those charged gives you the ability to then, they'll have USB ports and power cord ports. You can have one of those, and that'll provide you a lot. And then Harbor Freight sells some little photovoltaic panels that are about this big. See if I can get into the picture, that are inexpensive, that you can use to charge that kind of battery or cell phones or other things. So again, it doesn't cost very much money to have some backup power. I bought a beautiful bed that elevates. We were in the 0G position earlier in the year when we had a power outage at about 8 o'clock at night. I found I had a hard time getting out of bed because I was sandwiched into it, and being electric, the power is out, no lights, and had a hard time climbing out. I now bought one of those boxes, put it underneath the bed, plugged the bed into it, plugged my light into it, plugged it into the wall. And when we had the last power outage with this windstorm, I could put the bed up, down, get my stuff, charge my tools. It was great. Hope that helps.
Bill, I was hoping you could tell that story you told us about a specific church where kind of a strange guy entered.
Oh, church security, yes.
Yeah, church security. Could you go over
I would
that?
love to. I taught church security in Colorado. I've worked with law enforcement to do that for faith-based groups. And people have this, we talked about misconceptions earlier. Everybody has a misconception that if you go to church, God will protect you, everything's okay, there's only good people in there. That isn't the truth. You have people that have restraining orders in there. You have parental disputes ongoing. You have, it's been proven you have drug transactions taking place in the parking lot. You have assaults taking place in the church restrooms. You have terrible things happening in all colors of churches everywhere. And so some basic security is important. Checking the building, making sure it's locked, make sure there's nobody there in the closets, in the library, in the restrooms, et cetera. That's a very basic start. We've found homeless people camping out in church buildings. And there's a different way to help homeless people than to have them hiding in the dark where they might put somebody else at risk when they come in. Kidnappings have taken place where there's a nursery, all the members are in their Sunday school class, and either a non-custodial parent or a stranger comes in and checks a kid out. So you do need to think church security, unfortunately, and the Lord does his best to protect us, but we need to do what we can to protect ourselves as well. Thank you, Julianne.
I have a question.
Yes, George.
You had mentioned a couple of websites that that would be helpful. Is there one website you would recommend for really good information for personal home preparedness, and one for groups like faith-based groups?
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things I was going to mention at the closing was I have 2 documents I'm going to send to Sandra. The first is a quick guide, I call it. It's what are the first 5 things you do if the bad thing's about to happen? What are the next 5 things you do if the bad thing happens? Attached to that is a communications guide that lists all the critical telephone numbers in Cache Valley. Then it lists all the key websites that have all the emergency information. Then I think I've got Twitter connects as well there, where the information flow is a trusted flow.
Okay.
I will send that along with George, what you need, which is give me something easy to go get my list so that I can start working on it. I will send those when we're finished. Unfortunately, I'm working on my laptop because my hard drive crashed this week. Murphy's Law is alive and well. So it might take me a day or 2 to be able to recover those documents and get them to you.
Okay.
But I'll give you the guides to try to make it as easy as I can for you.
Great, Bill, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you keep in your small pack, your emergency pack that you carry with you?
I keep a lanyard with a whistle, waterproof matches, and a compass. That's about that big. Help me get where I'm intending to go, start a fire, etc. I keep a backup cell phone I keep charged, because even if you don't have a chip in it, most of them will allow you to dial 911, so you've got a backup if you have to. I keep an metallic blanket for warmth and for shelter if it's raining. I keep a variety of other small things and a couple of pieces of jerky or beer stick in there for a little bit of nutrient. Now I also have a walkie-talkie that I carry in there. I bought a plastic box about this big at the sporting goods store that has a waterproof seal on it and a compass built into it, big enough to hold a walkie-talkie as well. And all of my family, we have a one-pager that we put together that I think Julianne's seen, that's for your family, that says, here's what channel we're going to be on walkie-talkie, here's what frequency we'll be on if I'm on my ham radio, here's the critical addresses, phone numbers that you need, and it's laminated on a plastic card. tells my blood type, my wife's blood type, says if we're evacuated, where can the grandkids go to find us? If we evacuate and they have to go north, where are we going to be? If we got to go east, where are we going to be? And it's all on a card that you laminate, click it on your grab and go bag, put it in your glove compartment, on your car, put it in your purse or your briefcase. And when your hair's on fire, the only thing you have to remember is, where's my card? Because it'll remind you all the decisions that you've already made. And I'll send you a template, a Word document that you can make your own at the kitchen table when your hair is not on fire for about 20 minutes worth of work.
Great, thank you.
I would recommend you put cash in there too, because credit cards aren't going to work.
Yeah, good. And let me talk about cash. A lot of people think, oh, I got $500 in an envelope, $100 bills. Guess what? Gas, if the power goes out, the chance of getting the gas pumped out of the ground is small because most gas stations don't have backup power. And when it's in the ground, it's in the ground. If they are pumping and you're there with your can to get it, they don't make change. Their registers are down. And if all you got's $100 bill and you got a 5-gallon can, guess what? That's $100 for 5 gallons of gas. So you want to keep small bills if you can.
It's 11 o'clock.
If there's no more questions, I will continue to be a resource for you guys. As I said, I was really touched by your program opening today. I think you're spot on. You have my heart of hearts with your diversity and your willingness and recognition of the importance of helping one another and supporting one another. Over to you, Joe or Sandra.
Thank you so much. Let me see. All right. So how about we put up our offering link while we are playing our final song here. All right, so we have the offering link up here, and I believe we are splitting the offering link with the food pantry right now. I think, I believe that was for the entire month of November, that the offering is being split with the food pantry. So I have a little reading here to go along with that. The offering is a sacrament of the Free Church. It is supported by the voluntary generosity of all who join with us. The offering will now be given and received in grateful appreciation of our shared hopes and values. Right, and then and Jordan has a song to play for us that that Lindy sent.
Yeah, this is actually from the American Festival course provided by Leslie, who you will see in the video if you look closely.
Still and soft.
Thank you, Leslie, for sharing that with all of us. It was wonderful. And it's so amazing with the technology that we have right now that we're able to put something like that together, even though everyone has to be apart. All right. I have some closing words for you real quick before we extinguish our chalice. Go out into the highways and byways. Give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it, let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach the kindness and everlasting love of God. All right, and now I will extinguish our chalice, and then we can kind of open it up for chatting if people would like to. The words for extinguishing the chalice are up in the chat here, so if you would like to join in, feel free. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of courage and commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world. And thank you for joining us, everyone.